let's move on to our third presentation by Dr. Ji-won Jeon. She is a senior research fellow at the Center for Transnational Migration and Social Inclusion at the Seoul National University. Her research interests include care work and inequalities among care workers, work-life balance, changing patterns of time use across the lifespan. Today, she will present the findings from the recent survey on care work in Korea.
Hello everyone, I trust our interpreter, so I will be presenting in Korean. I'd like to thank all of you for staying with us for such a long time, listening to all the presentations and discussions. Thank you once again. Let me begin my presentation. Earlier, Professor Peng and Dr. Seo talked about the global trends of migrant care workers and their socioeconomic implications and shared much insights. In this context, I want to talk about the actual potential consumers of migrant care workers. These consumers are the current family care providers, usually the parents of young children or family members of elders in need of care. We've recently conducted a survey on their thoughts about the migrant care workers, and that's going to be the topic of my presentation. In Korea, Korean diaspora with foreign nationality, usually the Korean Chinese, are working as caregivers or childcare workers and in other care fields. Now there are talks on allowing other foreigners to work as care providers by expanding the migrant care workforce. Especially last year and this year, major business papers covered reports on the care issue and actively promoted the idea of foreign nannies or housekeepers as a way to tackle the low fertility issue. And in October, Mayor Oh Se-hoon submitted this agenda during the cabinet meeting, gaining spotlight to the issue. The proposal made by Mayor Oh was the adoption of foreign nanny program. This proposal shows the context in which the implementation of migrant care workers program is discussed in Korea. Mayor Oh said that Hong Kong and Singapore, which experienced a declining fertility, saw an increase in female labor force participation and slowdown in fertility decline thanks to the program. In Korea, you spend about 2 to 3 million Korean won per month to hire a nanny, whereas in Singapore it costs around 380,000 to 760,000 Korean won, saying that the introduction of a foreign nanny system will help those who could not hire nannies due to financial reasons or lack of supply. As such, the implementation of migrant childcare worker system was mostly viewed as a response to the low fertility issue and focused on the fact that people could utilize low-cost labor. So our research team, with regards to this issue, wanted to find out what the actual potential consumers of care service, such as parents or family members of senior care, thought. For instance, do parents with young children actually want to hire foreign nannies? If so, do they want the Hong Kong or Singaporean style live-in type workers, which is discussed by the people nowadays, or do they prefer live-out option? And how much are they willing to pay? And what is the most important aspect when hiring a foreign migrant worker? If let's say they do not want the service of migrant care workers, then why so? Regardless of their willingness to use the service, what seems to be the appropriate wage for the migrant care workers? And how much does Singapore, Hong Kong, Canada, and other countries' household pay to the migrant care workers? These are the questions of our survey, and we asked the same question for elder care. The data that we used for the analysis is as follows. CTMS added questions on the perspectives on migrant care workers in our regular survey. So we added the migrant care worker questions in our regular survey. For childcare module, we surveyed fathers or mothers, about 1,000 in total, or elder care module, we surveyed households with seniors aged 65 and over who need care due to age or conditions, a total of 1,002 main caregivers. The surveys were conducted in person by Gallup Korea. What I would like to mention, though, is that we've just received the data, so the results that I'm sharing today are not estimates of certain models, but just the pure outcome of the survey itself. So I'm just introducing what the survey was about. The first question was on the willingness to hire migrant care workers. About 9% of the elder care respondents and 7% of child care respondents said they were willing to hire migrant caregivers, and 23% and 11% replied not sure, respectively. Can you switch the slide for me? Can we go to the next slide, please? So we need to move over to the next slide to see the table. I will continue. So in more detail, in case of elder care, those looking after seniors with LTCI levels 1 and 5, so those with dementia, had a relatively higher willingness to hire foreign workers. So this was the slide that I just talked about. And in case of childcare, if the youngest child was aged between 7 or 9, or if the respondent had 3 or more children, they're more willing to hire migrant care workers. The most important factor when hiring a migrant caregiver was, for the elder care module, the Korean language skills, followed by the experience in care work and understanding of the Korean culture. In case of the childcare module, similarly, the Korean language skills were regarded as the most important, followed by the care work related certificates and qualifications. So these parents want something more than just mere experience in care work. So in case of childcare, we asked why the respondents considered using migrant caregiver service. And the biggest response, interestingly enough, was the potential help for the child's language education, such as English and Chinese. So they were able to answer with multiple answers. So we'll see them in future results as well. As for the preferred form of service, both in childcare and elder care module, almost 90% of the respondents preferred the live-out commuting option. And to the question on how many days people wanted live-out care services, elder care module respondents replied in the order of 5 days, 3 days, and 6 days per week, and about on average 5.1 hours per day. Childcare respondents, more than half, also wanted 5 days a week service, but wanted fewer hours than elder care at 3.4 hours on average. It's still early to say, but we can see a pattern here. When we first conducted the survey, we assumed, similar to a few years before, there would be a demand for live-in nannies looking after their very young children, but the demand of parents with children age 0 to 2, the demand was really low, and the live-in service demand was also low. For the live-out option as well, rather than long hours, they preferred an average 2 to 3 hours of service. And respondents with children of ages 7 to 9 were more willing to use the service. This is probably because parents can take childcare leaves for their infants and toddlers or send them to full-day care centers. So maybe that's why we have a smaller demand. So rather than live-in care providers, they want someone who can take care of their children between aged 7 or 9 for a few hours after return from elementary school. So I think that's the pattern we can see here from the survey results. For elder care, their preferred mean pay was 7,800 won per hour, and the median pay was about 10,000 won. For childcare, the mean was 10,500 won per hour, and the median was 10,000 won. But most respondents replied they will not consider or are not sure about using migrant caregiver service. For elder care, the biggest reason was the language barrier. So when we consider the implementation of the migrant care worker system, language proficiency will be an important factor to take into account. In case of childcare, following the language barrier, the biggest reason was the difficulty of trusting a foreign national. Regardless of their willingness to use the service, we asked the respondents on their thoughts on the appropriate level of payment if the migrant care worker program was to be implemented. Most said that it should be somewhere between the Korean caregiver and origin country's wage. recording 38% and 32% for childcare and elder care respectively. Those who said slightly less than Korea wage was 22.8% and 32.4% respectively. So slightly lower than the wage that's given to domestic workers in Korea. For your information, the wage and employment costs of migrant care workers for different countries is as follows. Because the definition of care workforce and the working conditions and hours differ by nation, it's difficult to find out the exact amount, the exact wage or cost. But according to the researchers in our center, Dr. Kim Jing-lee and Choi Jung-ha at our center, at the minimum level, not based on skills, based on the minimum level, in the UK and Canada, the child care service amounts at least to 2.52 million and 2.89 million per month, respectively. In Singapore, child care service amounts to 0.73 million and elder care 0.84 million. The same for Hong Kong is 0.83 million and 1.05 million. For Taiwan is 0.86 million and 1.5 million respectively. The total cost here increases if you include the employer's monthly costs such as tax, insurance, meal cost. There's also going to be physical check cost, healthcare costs, allowances, and agency fees. For the live-in options, of course, there will be no extra housing costs. We would have to consider that. But for the live out or commuting options like Japan, the annual income of the workers is about 30.5 million. Among the UK, Canada, Japan, there was no difference in the minimum wage between foreign and domestic workers, but in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, the pay is lower than domestic workers. As for the exact figures and the cost to the living standards per country ratio, it will require a more in-depth study. So this is what I would like to say for my presentation. As we studied the potential Korean care service consumers, I realized that we should change the way we view the topic of introducing migrant care worker system in Korea. I know we have Dr. Kim Young-mi, Ho Young-suk, and Chesori, and other experts joining us. They are conducting meaningful studies in this topic, but the way this topic is dealt by the media or political discourses is a bit different from what our experts worry and suggest. It's also a bit off, if you look at our research results, from the actual demands of the potential consumers that we have surveyed. First, instead of introducing foreign nannies, I think we would have to secure the migrant elder care workforce and prepare a relevant system. This may be more urgent and important because Korea's population is aging rapidly. For sure, the present and future senior population may be more healthy and active in the future, but care burden will inevitably increase. According to research, the number of seniors residing in provincial areas and requiring long-term care in Korea will triple by 2067. Considering the high share of one-member families today, the care provided by spouses, children, or daughter-in-laws or other family members will not be there anymore. But with just a small amount of help, seniors can live in their own homes instead of going to nursing facilities or institutions. So this can actually reduce our social costs and increase their satisfaction. So it'll be helpful to secure more elder care workforce. One more thing is that we also saw from Professor Peng's presentation, there's not enough care workforce, and the supply is not just something Korea wants. The global demand for care work is growing rapidly. If the sending countries undergo economic growth, less workers may be willing to go overseas. For instance, one activist in Hong Kong said that the Filipino children are left without care as their mothers leave to care for other national children. She's asking the Philippine government to increase the domestic jobs and decrease the number of workers going abroad. More importantly, sending countries and other Philippine countries will also experience aging population, so it will be difficult to secure the care workforce itself in the future, and quality care workers may move to countries that provide more decent jobs. So depending on the location, distance, culture, and having to learn Korean language, how appealing will Korea be in terms of a destination to work? To this end, I believe that we need to change the way we deal with the migrant care workers implementation. We need to change our perspective. We need to shift our focus from securing child care workers to elder care workers and move away from cheap labor to quality care. In order to supply quality care workers in a sustainable manner, we mentioned the words trust and qualifications earlier, but care is about having faith in others to let others care my beloved family members or myself. In that sense, this is a field of work that requires more quality work and respect than any other. Sometimes the press says that we should lower the requirements to introduce cheap labor. There are a lot of reporters and writers who says that. But I would like to ask those reporters, businessmen and politicians if you are comfortable having those workers care for your parents and children. I should not be angry, but anyhow, moving on. A lot of experts are researching this topic already, but going forward, we need to actively find a migrant care worker system that fits with Korea's situation expectations. In particular, we need to ask the following questions. In the context of sourcing sustainable quality care workers, how will we attract those workers? Is Korea an appealing destination? How can we equip the workers with both Korean language skills and care-related skills? And for those who are equipped with these skills, what kind of incentives can we provide for these caregivers to stay long-term, to utilize their expertise and experience in Korea? Or this may require imagination. Would there be a way for us to foster care workforce from their home country and then bring them to Korea? This might be quite experimental. Also, we need to think about the right type of working. I think the slide's not moving. I'll just continue. Also, we need to think about the right type of working and living arrangements for Korea, as well as cost. The high preference of live-out commuting type service providers, the high living costs, may be a barrier. We could think about building a dormitory for the care workers or think about other ways to reduce costs. And rather than spending the senior years in nursing homes or other care facilities, there are more benefits living in one's own home. So in that sense, we should think about providing support for hiring caregivers at home. I'm almost done. For sure, for a smooth adaptation or to respond to problems, we would need procedures and programs. For instance, in Singapore, to hire migrant care workers, the employers need to undergo lengthy education and training. The biggest problem is food. People from Middle East, they are not given enough food. Sometimes they cannot eat the food that they're given. So in Singapore, many people struggle as workers because their taste is different. So with regards to these problems, Singapore is providing very detailed training for their employers to prevent any issues in advance. So we would have to think about all of these trainings and education programs. And we also need to come up with a monitoring programs for these migrant workers as well as the caretakers. And according to the recent research made by Dr. Chesori, Japan prepared 10 years to implement this migrant care worker system. And in Canada, we can see that they have gone through numerous trials and errors and experimentation to come up with a similar system. We should move away from the discourse on saying, why can't we just hire cheap Philippine aunties? Rather, we should focus on how we can secure quality care workers and provide an environment where it could be both meaningful for both the caregivers and care receivers. So I think it's an urgent time for us to come up with a good system in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. John, for sharing your findings and suggestions for the Korean community. So thank you for all presenters for sharing your insight and research findings on migrant care workers.